Hey podcasters, welcome to the Shaun Herr Show, where we learn how to break the slimming cycle by mastering your mind, meals and movement, helping you finally achieve a balanced lifestyle and long-lasting results. In the next few episodes, we're going big on mastering meals. See, there's a lot of confusion when it comes to the world of nutrition, with every diet telling you you need to do something different. Some of you will know this, some of you might not. But a month or so ago, I joined a load of Facebook groups to try and get a better understanding of where people are getting stuck in their weight loss efforts, what questions they have and where the confusion is coming from. Because then I'll know what kind of content to create for you guys, because I'll know what questions I need to answer. And I'll tell you what, being in those groups is actually really motivating for me, because so many of the sticking points people have are so simple. It's just that they've not been educated properly, or they've kind of been educated with half the information, and someone comes along with a load of bullshit and fills in the other half, sending them down a path of just wasted time and money and probably ending up back where you started. So in these next 3 episodes, we're going to be talking all about calories. Now, you probably already know that I don't actually count calories with 99% of clients in my online coaching academy, because it's not relevant for the stage in the journey they're at. However, calories and energy balance is what all weight loss or gain comes down to. So it's important that you understand how that basic principle works. Then once you know that, you can see how that principle applies to every diet you've ever done, and how you can bear that principle in mind as you go forward. That's what we're going to look at in each of these episodes. Today, we're looking at what calories actually are and how the principle of calorie balance actually and always works, even if you think it doesn't apply to you. Next week, we're going to look into some of the most popular diets and how they all use this principle, from Atkins to Zone to flat tummy tea. And finally, in part 3, we're going to look at the Mythical 1200 calorie goal and my recommendations for long-term weight loss with the principle of calorie balance in mind. Here we go, part 1. A lot of people hear the words calorie balance and think that's just about eating less and moving more, because that's how your calories come in and that's how they go out. Sounds simple enough. But the thing is, it's not that simple. Those two things are important parts of the calorie balance equation, but there's a lot more to it than that. Calorie balance is also known as energy balance, because a calorie is just a unit of energy. Just like a meter is a unit of distance and a second is a unit of time. It's a way to measure an amount of something. Another way to measure energy is in joules. That's why on your nutrition labels you see the energy measured in kJ and kcal, just like how you can measure distance in miles or meters. 1 calorie is actually the amount of energy it takes to heat up 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. You don't necessarily need to know that, but it's always good to be able to out and edge friends. Because calories are just a unit of energy, what we're talking about is the balance between the amount of energy coming into your body and the amount of energy being used by or leaving your body. This is where that thermodynamics thing you might have heard about comes into the picture. So let's do a quick physics lesson. There's this thing, right, called the law of conservation of energy. That law means energy cannot be created or destroyed, only converted into another form of energy. Basically, the whole universe is just one big bubble of energy. Sometimes the energy is absorbed by things, sometimes it's stored in things, sometimes it's released from things. Imagine a tree. The tree absorbs light from the sun, which is where it gets its energy from. It uses that energy to grow, and then when it dies, that energy is still stored inside it. Millions of years later, that tree turns into coal or oil, which we burn to release the energy. Or imagine an antelope. An antelope is full of energy bouncing around the savannah. A lion then comes along and eats the antelope, absorbing its energy. But when the lions die, they become the grass, and the antelope eat the grass. And so we're all connected in the great circle of life and the law of conservation of energy. The same thing happens in your body. It absorbs energy from food. Some of the energy it uses to make you move and bounce around like the antelope. Some of the energy gets stored as fat to use that energy later, like a tree in the winter or a bear when it's hibernating. This is where it gets more complicated than just eat less and move more. It's not as simple as one way in, one way out. There are a lot of other things happening in your body that use up energy that aren't exercise. Before I started writing this, I was going to say that there are actually 6 factors that affect energy balance. 2 in, 4 out. But as I was writing, I realized there are actually a lot more than that, and they all affect each other as well. But let's do our best to try and simplify it, or at least dig deep enough so you understand the nuance of it all, but not so deep that it becomes overwhelming. First things first, there are two sides to the equation, calories in and calories out, or energy in and energy out. Remember, calories are just a way to measure energy. Remember that throughout everything else we talk about in this little mini-series. It just means energy. The total amount of calories that goes into your body is always exactly the same as the total amount that eventually comes out of your body. Eventually. You absorb the energy through your food, and then you use that energy to move, to grow, for all your body's internal functions, and then the energy left over when you die goes into the soil when you become the grass. Just like the circle of life. Let's dig a little bit more into the energy coming in, and how tricky it actually is to measure it. If you're already into calorie counting, you've probably used MyFitnessPal or a similar calorie counter. You look up the food you're eating, put in how much you're eating, and that tells you how many calories you've had altogether. Easy. Easy, but not as accurate as you probably think, because the world and farming isn't a constant perfect system. If the potato you have today comes from a farm that happens to have more nutritious soil than the one you have tomorrow, the exact 100 grams you measure out will probably have a different amount of calories and vitamins and minerals. And the people who make the labels know this. In fact, there's a guideline to it. The amount of calories on your food label is allowed to have an error of up to 24% in the UK. Well, actually the error allowed is up to 8 grams per 100 grams of each of proteins, carbs and fats, which altogether makes it 24%. So for example, that means if you're carefully, meticulously weighing out your food so you're getting exactly 2,000 calories a day, the amount of calories you're actually eating could be anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500, which isn't ideal if 2,000 is the number you've worked out you need to lose weight. Plus, then there's the issue of how many of those 2,000 calories are actually absorbed by your body. See, your body isn't 100% efficient at extracting and absorbing the energy of food. If you have poor gut function, you won't digest and absorb as much nutrition from your food, which is why it's important to look after your gut. What's the point of eating all those veggies if you can't absorb the nutrients? And it's not just the state of your gut that determines how many calories you end up getting from your food. It's the state your food is in as well, as in how it's prepared and cooked. Remember I just said your gut has to digest and absorb the food? Well, if the food is already digested, so to speak, say in a smoothie, you can absorb more. For example, if you boil an egg, you free up 35% more calories. If you grill a steak, you get 22% more. And if you bake a potato, you can get up to 91% more calories than if it was raw. And don't take that to mean you should eat everything raw because then you'll be eating fewer calories. That's stupid. Please remember, food isn't just calories. It's vitamins and minerals and all the other nutrients that make your body work properly. That means if you're reducing the amount of calories you're taking in terms of gut function and digestibility, you're also reducing the amount of nutrients your body has to function on. And you want your body to function. That's what makes you feel lively and healthy and, be alive. So there's a lot that can influence the amount of calories or energy coming into our bodies, the amount we're absorbing. And it's not as easy to measure as weighing your food and looking at the label. But what about the other side? Is it easier to work out how much energy our bodies are using? Not really. We typically define the outside of the equation as being made of 4 main factors with fancy acronyms. The first is what you usually just call our metabolism, technically known as your basal metabolic rate, or BMR for short. This is how much energy your body has to use just to keep you alive. If you didn't move at all for an entire day, not even turned your head or lifted your arm, this is how much energy you'd use. That's the energy to replenish all your cells, keep your heart beating, keep your brain thinking, your lungs breathing, and every other basic function of being alive. This is the energy required for the basic machine of you. Your BMR is basically based on how much of you there is, as in your weight, your age, and whether you're male or female, because men and women have different bodily functions. And if there's more of you to keep alive because you're heavier, you need to use more energy to do that. That's why if you're on the larger side and use a calorie calculator, you'll get a higher result than someone else of the same sex and age. But there are other things that affect this basal metabolic rate, such as medical conditions like hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism and other conditions that send your hormones out of whack, like the menopause, can slow your metabolism and therefore reduce the amount of calories you need each day to maintain your current weight. This doesn't mean calorie balance doesn't apply to you, it just means you need less than a calorie calculator will tell you, because it probably didn't ask about your hormonal status. The second main factor on the outside of the equation is the thermic effect of food, TEF for short. This is how much energy your body has to use to digest your food. Imagine an old-fashioned coal-fired steam train. The train gets loads of energy from burning up coal, but you need a couple of guys shoveling coal into the fire. Those guys are using up some of their energy, so the fire in the engine can create more energy from the coal and move the train. If those guys just jumped out and tried to push, nothing would happen. You have to use up some of your energy to create more energy, just like the guys on the train do. It just so happens your body is clever enough to get more energy out of the food than it puts in to get the energy out. But it does have to put some energy into doing that, which is where the thermic effect of food comes in. Some foods, like protein, actually require more energy for our bodies to break them down and digest them, which is one reason you want to keep your protein intake high if you're trying to lose weight, but we can get into that in another episode. The third and fourth main factors on the outside of the equation are actually part of the same thing, moving. The first one, or the third one altogether, the next one anyway, is usually called the thermic effect of exercise, TEE, like a golf tee for short. That's the energy you use while you're specifically working out, which, by the way, your treadmills and fitness trackers have no real clue about. And finally, we have one you might have heard a bit about recently, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT for short. This is the energy you use when you're moving in any way that isn't specifically working out. Standing up and sitting down, walking, chopping vegetables, gardening, taking the stairs instead of the lift, standing up on the bus rather than sitting down, lifting your fork to your mouth, fidgeting, writing, and literally any other way you move. Even me moving my hands like this. These are all the ways you use energy. All those four. Still doesn't sound that complicated, does it? The complication comes in when you find out that all those things, both in and out, affect each other. But before we get into that, we need to talk about what happens if the equation isn't balanced. If the amount of energy your body absorbs is exactly the same as the amount it's using to live, digest, and move, nothing changes. Your weight stays the same. But if your body is absorbing more energy than it's currently using to live, digest, and move, it's going to store that extra energy for later, just in case there comes a time when there's not enough. That extra energy gets stored in fat cells. This is called being in a calorie surplus, and you can also use it to grow if you're growing. Your body doesn't know you live around the corner from Asda and that you always have an unlimited access to food and energy, and that's why it stores the energy for later, no matter how much you wish it didn't. On the other side of things, if your body is absorbing less energy than it's currently using to live, digest, and move, it's going to dip into those fat cells and use them up for the backup energy. It's a pretty clever thing, your body, and this is called being in a calorie deficit. And that's basically everything about how calorie balance works. You absorb energy from food, you use up that energy through all your bodily functions, and the extra energy gets stored as fat, and a lack of energy coming in uses up the energy in the fat cells. Simple. Almost. Because like I said before, those in and out factors all affect each other, and they're affected by other things as well. Your body's top priority is keeping you alive, and if you tip the scale one way, your body will fight back to tip it the other and keep the balance. We like that. Here's an example. Say you use a calorie calculator that spits out your daily needs as 2,500 calories. You start eating 2,250 a day, so you're in a deficit and your body needs to use up the fat stores. Once a certain amount of those fat stores have been used up, there's now less of you to keep alive, which means your metabolism, your BMR, is lower. Here's an example. Say you use a calorie calculator that spits out your daily needs as 2,500 calories. You start eating 2,250 a day, so you're in a calorie deficit and your body needs to use up the fat stores. Once a certain amount of those fat stores have been used up, there's less of you to keep alive, which means your metabolism is now lower, which means your daily calorie needs come down to 2,250, which means you're no longer in a deficit, which means you won't use up any more fat stores. Oh dear. Here's another one. We talked before about how certain medical conditions can affect your BMR. Well, certain medications affect things too. Some medications increase your appetite, meaning without realizing, you end up eating slightly more than usual. A couple of extra seconds pouring your cereal, maybe an extra little bit of peanut butter on your rice cake, meaning overall, your calories in is higher, which could lead to weight gain. Or maybe you continue to drop your calories lower and lower. Remember how we said calorie balance is the balance between how many calories your body is absorbing and how many it's using to live, digest, and move? If there's too much going out and there's not enough coming in, your body can just reduce the amount going out without consciously thinking about it or noticing you might be fidgeting less, or taking the lift over the stairs, or the car over walking, or sitting on the bus instead of standing. Your body is clever and it knows that all these little things add up, and it will use all those little things to its advantage to restore the balance. Your metabolism doesn't get broken, energy balance doesn't not apply to you anymore because you have a medical condition or are on medication. The factors affecting the equation are just changed by those circumstances. Nobody defies energy balance. Nobody defies the law of conservation of energy, unless you're some kind of being from another dimension, in which case, but I'm pretty sure you're not from another dimension, so no need to worry about that. If you feel like calorie balance doesn't apply to you, you just haven't thought far enough into how your circumstances affect the equation. No matter what your circumstances are, if your body is absorbing more calories than it's using, taking all the factors and variables into account, then you will store energy as fat. And the same goes the other way. If your body is using more calories than it's absorbing, taking all the other factors and variables into account, you will use fat for energy. Mind you, I say you'll store fat and use fat, you could also store excess energy and nutrients as muscle, bone, and other organs. Like I said before, growing. But that would be getting way too complicated, so let's leave that for a minute. Bottom line, calorie balance is the underlying principle of all fat loss and gain. And we're going to get into that a bit more in the next episode when we look into various diets and how, even though they don't necessarily involve counting calories, they're still taking advantage of the principle of calorie balance. We're talking Weight Watchers, we're talking keto, we're even talking detox tea. I'm going to save my approach to nutrition for part 3, where I'll be explaining how even my approach all comes down to calorie balance. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2 of All About Calories. If you like this episode, please do leave a like and a comment and share it with your friends if you're watching on Facebook. And if you're watching on YouTube, it will be great if you could click the like button, drop a comment and subscribe to the channel. And of course, for my podcast listeners, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. And if you haven't already, please do leave a review on iTunes or whatever platform you're listening on. All those things help boost the channel in search results and all that stuff so it reaches more people and I get to help more people learn about calorie balance. Thanks for tuning in to this episode and I'll see you in the next one.